When most people picture Russia in their minds, they picture European Russia, which is literally the part of Russia on the western side that sits in Europe and is by far the most populated part of the country. But European Russia only accounts for 23% of the total territory that is Russia. The other 77% is to the east of European Russia. It starts at the Ural mountain range and it extends all the way over 5 million square miles to the Pacific Ocean. And this vast, mostly forested expanse, which is 50 times bigger than the entire United Kingdom, is called Siberia. And Siberia is absolutely brutal. In Siberia, it is almost always freezing cold. Literally. The average annual temperature across all of Siberia is 32.9 degrees Fahrenheit, so it is 0.9 degrees above freezing on average every single day. In addition to the extremely deadly weather that exists basically year-round in Siberia, Siberia is also home to a bunch of huge deadly animals, such as the brown bear, which is the same as the infamous grizzly bear in North America, the gray wolf, which by size alone makes virtually all other wolves look like little puppies. Gray wolves can grow to be nearly 200 pounds. And of course, there is the highly intelligent Siberian tiger, who is perhaps one of the only predators on Earth that is known to seek out and kill people for revenge. For example, in 1997, a hunter named Vladimir Markov was walking through a Siberian forest when he came face to face with one of these Siberian tigers, and he ended up shooting the tiger before fleeing, except the tiger didn't die. Instead, it got up and secretly followed Vladimir all the way back to his cabin, and then this tiger camped out outside of the cabin until Vladimir came out again, and the tiger pounced, killed him, and ate him. And so unsurprisingly, Siberia has an absolutely minuscule population relative to its massive size. However, there are some adventurous people out there who are drawn to Siberia for the same reasons that most other people avoid it. These adventurous people see Siberia as one of the last truly wild places on our planet, and they want to experience it for themselves. And one of these highly adventurous people was a young man named Colin Madsen. Colin, who came from a very successful American family, was a big outdoors enthusiast who at some point in his youth began researching Siberia because he fell in love with its rugged natural beauty. He quickly began researching not only Siberia, but Siberian culture and Russian culture, and also at some point he became fluent in the Russian language. Then, in 2013, when Colin was 22 years old, he left his home in Missouri and moved to Siberia. He settled in one of Siberia's few population centers, a city called Irkutsk, which is located in the southeast of Siberia and right along the edge of Lake Baikal, which is the world's deepest freshwater lake. Colin's Siberia plan was twofold. He would go to school while he was there, and he would go out and explore. And at first, his plan went perfectly. He was accepted into Moscow State Linguistic University in Irkutsk, and very quickly he made friends who were eager to accompany him on his adventures out into the Siberian wilderness. From his arrival in Siberia in 2013 to 2016, Colin did well in his studies, and he spent countless hours exploring the forests and mountainous areas all around Lake Baikal and right outside of Irkutsk. In fact, Colin became so familiar with this region that he began volunteering with a nonprofit in the area that went around marking new trails, which meant Colin was literally venturing into the wilds of Siberia and just marking the trail as he went. So when Colin's family heard about what happened to him in 2016, they could not believe it. In March of 2016, Colin and 3 of his good hiking friends, one was American and 2 were Russian, decided they wanted to go on a hike together. They settled on hiking to the summit of Love Peak, which was a mountain located a few hours away from Irkutsk in a small village called Arshan. This hike was nothing compared to the gnarly Siberian wilderness hikes all 4 of these guys had been on before. The trail that led up to Love Peak, it was fairly steep, but it was incredibly well marked, and all 4 of these guys had hiked it several times before. However, because Colin and his friends were so experienced at hiking in Siberia, they knew that even the easiest hikes needed to be respected because Siberia was still Siberia. There were dangers that lurked everywhere. And so the men called ahead to the village of Arshan, and they rented one of these small rustic cabins that's in the village that sits right at the base of Love Peak, and it's kind of tucked away in this forest. And so this cabin would serve as their sort of base camp and would allow them to arrive in Arshan, get their gear together, and then when they were ready, they could begin this hike to the summit. And so a few days later, on March 27th, Colin and his 3 friends loaded up their car and they drove west to Arshan. And when they got there, they stopped at a local store and got some supplies and then made their way to their cabin. Their cabin was just a single room with a few beds inside of it. It was enough to protect them from the elements, but really nothing more. As for a toilet, the cabin didn't have one, but there was an outhouse outside that they could use. So after the friends moved into the cabin and claimed their beds and put their things down, they all sat down and began prepping their gear and eating some food and chatting. And then finally at 2 a.m., they decided they needed to go to sleep because their plan was to get on the path up to Love Peak by 7 a.m., which meant they needed to get up at 5 a.m. to make their final preparations. So at 2 a.m., the lights in the cabin turned off and the friends all fell asleep. And then 3 hours later at 5 a.m., when the lights came back on again, it was immediately clear something was wrong. Colin was not in his bed. His friends assumed, when they looked over at his bed and saw his personal belongings were all still there, that Colin must have gotten up and headed outside, maybe to use the outhouse or go for a quick walk, and they just hadn't heard him leaving. And so the 3 friends initially just kind of shrugged off Colin's absence and said, he'll be back any minute, most likely, and if for some reason he's not back soon, he'll certainly be back by 7 a.m., because that was the agreed upon time they would leave for this hike. But as the minutes ticked closer and closer to 7 a.m. and Colin still had not shown up or tried to call them or do anything, the friends started to worry. It just didn't make any sense that Colin would just get up and leave without telling them where he was going. Finally, at 7 a.m., when Colin still had not shown up and the friends' cursory search of the outside area near the cabin had yielded no results, they decided they had to tell someone. And so they wrote a note addressed to Colin and they put it on the front of their cabin door. And this note basically just told Colin, if you come back here and you see this note, know that we're looking for you. So stay put or tell someone you're here. And so after putting up this note, the friends left the cabin and they headed to the nearest police station where they reported Colin missing. The police would eventually launch this huge search in and around Arshan, both in the forested area right around the village and then also up into the mountains near Love Peak. But despite this huge effort, no one could find Colin, at least not at first. On Monday, April 4th, so 8 days into Colin's disappearance, a group of searchers were looking in the forest about 1 mile away from the cabin where Colin and his friends had been staying. And they look up ahead and they see there is this clearing and there's something in the middle of it. And so the searchers begin moving their way towards this clearing, ducking under branches and stepping over brush. And when they get close enough, they can see Colin is in the clearing. And Colin is deceased. He was laying flat on his back with his left arm extended out to the side and his right arm extended but closer to his body, and both of his hands were clenched in tight fists. And on his hands and his wrists were visible abrasions and cuts, which later would be determined to have most likely been caused from someone or something holding on to him, trying to restrain Colin. Colin also had visible abrasions and cuts on the front of his neck. Colin's clothing, which consisted of a long-sleeve thermal shirt, heavy pants, and hiking boots, were ripped and torn in several places. And interestingly, Colin was not wearing socks under his boots. Now that seems inconsequential, but Colin had had surgery on both of his ankles and had scar tissue on his ankles that if he didn't have socks on, those scars would rub against the inside of his boot, and he said it was very painful. So he always wore socks. Also, Colin's body showed virtually no signs of decomposition, and all of his wounds and abrasions looked, quote, fresh, according to medical personnel. In short, Colin looked like he had recently been in some sort of physical altercation, and whoever or whatever he was grappling with had eventually overpowered him and killed him. although it was not clear how he actually died. Russian authorities were very quick to suspect Colin's 3 friends who had been with him, but they were brought into the station and they denied having anything to do with Colin's death, and they all passed their lie detector tests. After that, Russian authorities quickly closed this case by concluding that, well, if his friends didn't do it, then that means Colin must have been high on drugs or drinking alcohol or both, and he just wandered out of his cabin and he got lost in the woods and he died of hypothermia. He froze to death. The end. However, Colin's parents just could not accept that as being what happened to their son. There were a lot of reasons for skepticism, but the main one was that Colin was an absolute expert at navigating this particular region of Siberia. And so the idea that he would leave his cabin for a quick walk or something and get so completely lost that he would die 8 days later seemed way too far-fetched. And so Colin's parents hired a US-based private lab to do a review of Russia's autopsy of Colin to give their opinion if the autopsy was accurate or not. And this US-based lab pretty much immediately found that the Russian autopsy was not remotely accurate. Number 1, Colin was not under the influence of alcohol or drugs. He was sober, although technically he did have very small amounts of THC in his urine. THC is the chemical that is found in marijuana, but the amount was so little, it basically meant he had consumed the THC days before he went missing. And so he would not have been remotely affected by that small amount of THC in his system. Number 2, the lab determined that Colin almost certainly did not die from hypothermia. Instead, all signs pointed to Colin dying from being suffocated, meaning he was murdered. Someone crushed his airway or in some way restricted him from breathing, and that's what killed him. And 3, based on the lack of decomposition, the freshness of the injuries on Colin's body, and the lack of animal predation on his body when they found him, indicated that Colin did not just wander out of his cabin and immediately die somewhere in the forest. Instead, he was alive for most of the time people were looking for him, meaning when they found him, he likely had died within hours of being found. And so these findings by this US-based lab kind of create a general theory about what must have happened to Colin. After Colin left the cabin in the early morning hours of March 28th, maybe to go to the outhouse or to go for a quick walk, when he went outside, someone or something was nearby, and they either lured Colin to them or they straight up ambushed Colin and took him away. Now, we have no idea what happened to Colin after he was abducted, but we can safely assume that after being abducted and taken somewhere, he was alive, and he stayed alive for several days until on the 8th day of his disappearance, Colin was killed, likely by his captor, either at the spot where he was found, or he was killed somewhere else, maybe in the forest, and then moved to the spot where he was found. Many people believe it was the Russian government who targeted Colin, they kidnapped him, and they killed him. And their botched investigation into his death was actually a calculated cover-up. Colin had participated in at least one peaceful environmentalist-led protest in Siberia, and after the protest, Colin apparently got a written warning by the Russian police not to attend another protest. But why would Colin, who was just one of many people involved in these protests, be singled out by the Russian government and killed for his participation? And why would the government elect to kill Colin when he was with 3 of his closest friends who would immediately notice his absence? It just doesn't add up. Today, Colin's parents are still trying to figure out what happened to their son, but unfortunately, their son's case is closed in Russia, and so no one on the Russian side is talking to the parents or giving them any new information. And so as a result, they and the rest of us are left to wonder who or what was lurking in the shadows when Colin stepped out of the cabin that morning. And then where did they take him, and what did they do to him for nearly a week before they killed him deep inside of that Siberian forest? On or around June 10th, 2021, Jennifer Buell and her two sons, 12-year-old Charlie and 7-year-old Johnny, touched down at Cancun International Airport in Cancun, Mexico. The family, who lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was there for a nice long vacation during the kids' summer break, which had started just a few weeks earlier. After getting off the plane and getting their luggage, the Buell family made their way out of the airport and they hopped on a shuttle that brought them to their resort. They were staying at Club Med Cancun, which is a very popular all-inclusive family resort that's located right at the tip of the Riviera Maya. And the Riviera Maya is just stunningly beautiful. It's this stretch on the western side of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico that's basically all white sand beaches and beautiful clear turquoise water. But Club Med Cancun's fabulous location was not the only reason why families loved going there so much. Club Med, the huge hotel company behind this particular resort, is known for their gentils organisateurs. They call them GOs for short. And basically, these are staff members employed by Club Med at all of their locations everywhere in the world, whose sole job is to make sure the guests staying at their hotels have a truly unforgettable experience. And so these really friendly GOs are always walking around these hotels and talking to the guests and pointing them to the different places they can go within the hotel, and they encourage the guests to interact with each other and to participate in resort activities. And so a stay at a Club Med hotel, whether it's Cancun or anywhere in the world, is known to be very upbeat and highly interactive. So Jennifer and her two sons, they get off the shuttle at Club Med Cancun, they go inside, they get checked in, they make their way to their room, they drop their bags, and then they head out to explore the hotel. And pretty much right away, there were GOs all over the place coming up to welcome them to the hotel and pointing them to the best restaurants, the best places to go swimming, and what activities were coming up that night and what to look forward to that week. And right away, what stood out to the Buell family, specifically Charlie and Johnny, was the Kids Club / Teens Club. Basically, the GOs organized really fun games and activities just for the kids, depending on what age they were. And so this was really appealing to Charlie and Johnny to go play with other kids. And it was appealing to Jennifer because this would mean she could go off and actually relax because she would have childcare. So, starting that first night and over the next week they were in Cancun, Jennifer made sure they always were around the resort so that the boys could just take off and go hang out with this kids club, teen club whenever they wanted. And so the routine that the Buell family adopted over the course of their vacation was they would get up early, they would go to the white sand beaches right outside of their resort, and then after coming back to the resort, Charlie would almost always cut loose and go hang out for the rest of the day with the kids in the teen club, kids club, and Johnny, he mostly stayed with his mom, but over the course of the day, he would leave and do one-off activities with the club. And then at 9:15 p.m. at night, the trio would always link up on the pool deck and they would make their way in to see one of the shows that the GOs were putting on, ranging from comedy sketches to circus tricks. And so all in all, the Buell family vacation to Cancun, Mexico was really going as well as it could have been, until a simple game of hide and seek changed everything. On June 18th, so roughly 1 week after the Buell family had arrived in Mexico, the family got up and they began their typical vacation routine. They headed to the beach, and then afterwards, Charlie broke off and went to spend time with the kids at the Teen Club, Kids Club, and Johnny and Jennifer, they mostly stayed together for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, around 8:30 p.m., after all three of the Buells had had dinner, they decided to split up before rejoining at 9:15 to go in and see a show. Johnny wanted to head downstairs and go see a kids-only show. Jennifer wanted to head up to the second level to have chocolate fondue dessert with a friend she had made at the resort, and Charlie wanted to meet up with his friends from the Kids Club, Teens Club out on the pool deck where the GOs were organizing a big game of hide and seek. And so after watching his mother walk upstairs to the fondue restaurant and watching his younger brother head downstairs to the kids-only show, Charlie turned and ran towards the pool deck. And when he got there, he immediately linked up with his best friend from the vacation, a 13-year-old named Cyrus. And very quickly after that, the GOs who were on the pool deck with all these other kids that were out there, they said, okay, we're going to start counting. You guys all hide. And so the GOs, they walked to the side of this big pool deck, they covered their eyes, they began counting, and all the kids, Charlie and Cyrus included, scattered to find the best hiding spot. And right away, as Charlie and Cyrus are looking for places to hide, they're seeing the other kids are taking up all the best hiding spots. And so for a second, they're panicking. They're not going to have a good spot. Then both of the boys looked over to the side of the pool deck, and they realize there is a perfect hiding spot that nobody's taken. Around the outside of this huge open air pool deck was a metal fence. It was only a couple of feet tall, and it was made up of metal bars so you could see right through it. It was basically in place just to denote the edges of the resort property. And on one length of this perimeter fence, the south side of this fence, there was a gate built into this fence. And this gate was almost always closed and locked. The only time it was opened was when a GO or another hotel staff member would open it to lead guests out of the resort property to go off and do some excursion. But for some reason, on the night of June 18th, this fence was wide open. On the other side of this fence was just this small rectangular platform that jutted out about 10 feet from the pool deck, same level as the pool deck. And if you were standing on this platform with your back to the pool deck, on your left side would be a very small flight of stairs, just a couple of steps going down. And so Charlie and Cyrus, they look over and they see this gate is open, and they know there are those stairs kind of tucked down below the platform, and they're thinking, if we crouch down on those steps, no one will see us from the pool deck. We'll be obscured from view. And so Charlie and Cyrus, they run over to the open gate, they go through, they walk down a couple of steps, and they kind of tuck themselves down so they can barely look up and over onto the pool deck to see if anyone's coming, but they can tell there's no way anyone is going to see them unless they literally walk through the gate and are looking down the steps at them. And so Charlie and Cyrus, they're giggling with excitement because they know they have found the perfect hiding spot. And they're listening as the GOs are calling out, okay, ready or not, here we come. And after a couple of minutes, they're hearing the sound of the GOs finding all the other kids all over the pool deck. You know, there were some really good hiding spots, but eventually all the kids are found except for Charlie and Cyrus. And so Charlie and Cyrus, they start looking at each other and they're really excited about this, but they know no one's going to find them. But right before Cyrus and Charlie stood up and revealed themselves, Cyrus happened to notice there was a hose, like a garden hose, that was draped down the steps that they were on, and for some reason, the water was turned on. And so Cyrus grabbed the hose, and as he stood up, turning away from Charlie, he began spraying the water onto the pool deck, onto the GOs and all the kids who didn't know where they were. And so everybody on the pool deck is suddenly laughing and running away from the water. It's totally chaos, and Cyrus thinks it's hysterical. He's still just spraying everybody down. And then at some point, Cyrus stops and turns to see what Charlie's reaction is to this absolute bedlam that he's created on the pool deck. But when Cyrus turns around, Charlie's not there. Meanwhile, two other hotel guests who had nothing to do with this game of hide and seek, it was a mother and her adult son, they were having a meal up in the second floor restaurant that overlooked the pool deck.
Shadows in the alley, whispers down the street, neon signs and broken dreams, empty hearts, mechanical beat, crumbling towers, concrete cold, lost souls selling what they know, eyes that shine like broken glass, got no future, got no past, echoes in the static, voices of the wasted, calling out to nowhere, we're the ones who never faded. Midnight screams and bright blue lights, running from those urban nights, synthetic ghosts and foggy air, living like they just don't care.
And as they're sitting there enjoying their meal, they suddenly hear the sound of boys screaming. Now, immediately, they both can tell this is not a play scream. Someone is actually in danger, someone is hurt, something's going on here, and they try to look down onto the pool deck where these screams seem to be coming from, but they can't tell. It's dark out there, they can't see what's going on, and so acting on instinct, the woman and her son just stand up and start running through the restaurant and making their way downstairs. And as they're doing this, the woman's husband actually sees her charging through, and he, along with two other boys that happen to be near him, just start running after them, knowing that whatever's going on, it's bad, so they have to go help. And so when these 5 people get down to the pool deck, they hear the sound of the boys screaming again, and they can tell it's coming from that open gate, that platform area where Charlie and Cyrus had been hiding. And so these 5 people charge through the still open gate. They go out onto this platform and they look down the little flight of stairs and they see Cyrus. They don't see anybody else on the platform. It's just this one boy, and he looks totally shaken up, totally hysterical, and it's clear he is one of the boys that was screaming. And then before they could even ask him what was going on, they hear a sound coming from somewhere below the steps, and they all turn, and literally out of the darkness, Charlie just suddenly emerges, and he looks up at the adults and just says in a very calm voice, "Save me, save me." This normally completely off-limits, fenced-off platform that jutted out past the pool deck where the boys were hiding, that was actually a dock that sat over a swampy lagoon, and underneath that dock was a nest of crocodiles. And when Cyrus and Charlie were on that lower step, the crocodiles had noticed them, and when Cyrus had stood up and begun spraying the water onto the pool deck, one of those crocodiles, a 13-foot monster, had come out of the water, turned around, and literally leapt up onto those steps, bit Charlie by the leg, and pulled him into the water. The screams that woman and her son had heard while they were in that restaurant were Cyrus's and Charlie's, because initially when Charlie was pulled into the water, he didn't go directly under. And so Cyrus had managed to grab onto Charlie's arms, and he was trying to pull Charlie out of the crocodile's mouth, and the two of them were screaming for help. But by the time that woman and the other 4 people got down to the platform, Cyrus lost his grip on Charlie, and the croc and Charlie went under the water. And so those 5 people were standing there when the crocodile and Charlie just came back out of the water. And that's when Charlie was saying, "Save me, save me." He was in the crocodile's mouth. And when these 5 people saw Charlie and understood what was going on, without any hesitation, the adults leapt into the dark lagoon waters that are clearly infested with crocodiles and began beating the crap out of this crocodile. And while this melee is happening in these dark, murky lagoon waters with crocodiles everywhere, someone had gone into the fondue bar and told Jennifer, "Your son's being attacked by a crocodile." And she instantly leapt up and just ran across the restaurant, knocking anything over that was in her way. And finally, she got downstairs to the pool deck. She went through that gate out to that platform, and she saw her boy. Charlie was laying on his back, surrounded by totally frantic and hysterical adults. Charlie's leg looked like it had been through a meat grinder, but Charlie was awake and he was talking to the adults near him. In the time it took Jennifer to run through the restaurant and get down to the pool deck, those adults who had leapt into the murky lagoon water to fight with this crocodile had literally beaten it so badly that it released Charlie. And according to the people who watched this happen, this crocodile was putting up an unbelievable fight. It was whipping its head side to side, tearing into Charlie's leg. It kept pulling Charlie deeper and deeper into the water, and these adults just didn't stop. They were yanking on this crocodile, punching its eyes, gouging its eyes, and finally it worked. When Charlie was finally pulled to safety and was laying on the dock, he was in rough shape, and no one knew if he was going to survive or not. But luckily, there just happened to be a trauma nurse who was staying at the resort, who came outside. She assessed the situation, and she took charge. She stopped the bleeding in his leg, and she stayed with him and kept him calm until paramedics finally arrived. Charlie would be rushed to the hospital, where he would immediately undergo several surgeries that would save his life. Also, surgeons were able to miraculously save his leg. Initially, it seemed like he might have to have it amputated. As for Club Med, their response to this incident was enormous. Not only did they pay for all of Charlie's medical bills, but they also invested a lot of money into securing not only that fence and gate that led to the dock where he was attacked, but also just generally speaking around the resort to make sure there were no more attacks. Today, Charlie is back in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania with his family, and considering the horrible trauma he went through, he's remarkably well adjusted. In fact, in the Halloween that followed this attack, Charlie dressed up as a crocodile.